What's up, everyone? Welcome back to DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and today I am joined once again by my friend Matt Moreno. Matt, how you holding up? We're like 8 weeks into this thing. You doing all right?
Yeah, doing okay. A little anxious and curious to see how things are going to be going now with LA and surrounding areas sort of reopening. Obviously, hoping for the best, both just locally and then with baseball, which I'm sure we're about to get into.
Yeah, and let's dive right in because for an 8 week stretch in which there hasn't been any baseball played, we have not been short on information and news. And the latest, probably the biggest bombshell that's been dropped yet in the last few days is the latest proposal offered by Major League Baseball to the Players Association. And so, give me just a couple minutes to explain this for folks, and then we can unpack it. But basically, here's what happened. The Players Association and Major League Baseball have been negotiating on an agreement that would get folks back on the field. And the ball had been in Major League Baseball's court. They were arguing that a previous agreement was no longer valid. And so they presented a new one. Now, there were rumors that this new proposal would involve a revenue split, 50-50 revenue split, which the players didn't want because that's basically code for a salary cap. I think, thankfully, Major League Baseball got enough feedback from that idea when they floated it out there to know that was crazy. So they went another direction, but unfortunately, Major League Baseball players would tell you that it wasn't a whole lot better. The new proposal called for a significant cut in salaries that would affect all players on top of the deal they signed in late March, but most notably the highest players in the game. So again, March 26th, we'll talk about this in a little bit, an agreement was reached where players agreed to get half of their salary for the season. And this is on top of that. So the theory among some was that the owners were attempting to create division amongst players. Basically, the lower paid guys would be more willing to accept it because they're getting a much higher percentage of the money they're owed, and there's a lot more of them. So if they can get all the lowest paid players on board, they're thinking we can get this done. Unfortunately for them, that's not how it played out. Major League Baseball Players Association had this to say, quote, "The proposal involves massive additional pay cuts and the union is extremely disappointed." So here's the SparkNotes version for the math people in the room about how this works. Basically, for every dollar made up to $1 million, players would get 72.5%. So again, this is 72.5% of the 50% they've already agreed to. From 1 million to 5 million, you get 50%, 5 to 10 million, 40%, 10 to 20 million, 30%. Any dollar over 20 million, you're only getting 20% of what you had been agreed to. So the example that everyone's been using is the highest paid player in the game, Mike Trout. Mike Trout is due $37.7 million this year, and under the new agreement, he would make $5.7 million. Now, I almost said only $5.7 million, and I recognize how insensitive that might seem to some, but just think about the fact that if you were asked to take an 85% pay cut, almost regardless of how much you make, yes, $5.7 million is plenty of money, but an 85% pay cut he's being asked to take, which is insane. Now, there's postseason bonuses, which someone like Mike Trout would get a higher percentage of, so that's one idea, but overall, this was an unpopular proposal. I think Max Scherzer, who's on the MLB Players Association Executive Subcommittee, was most notable in what he had to say, and he said this: "After discussing the latest developments with the rest of the players, there's no reason to engage with MLB in any further compensation reductions. We have previously negotiated a pay cut in the version of prorated salaries, and there's no justification to accept a second pay cut based upon the current information the union has received. I'm glad to hear other players voicing the same viewpoint and believe MLB's economic strategy would completely change if all documentation were to become public information." Basically, what he is saying on behalf of the players is, we're good. We negotiated. We're fine with the deal that was signed 2 months ago. We haven't received anything that would make us think we need to renegotiate, so we're good. Now, the owners on the flip side say things have changed. Now it's official. We're not going to be playing with fans. And they say we're going to lose 40% of our revenue with no fans in the stadium. Now, the problem is they're just hoping the players will take their word for that. That 40% number hasn't been verified literally anywhere. It's just the number that they throw out. And so Scherzer, when he talks about documentation, is saying, show us the books and we'll talk. If you can prove to us that the 40% is legit, then we'll talk. So this all happens. A couple days go by. Jeff Passan reports that the MLB Players Association is going to send a counter proposal back with economic terms by the end of the week. However, no salary concessions. The high point of the Players Association counter is that they're suggesting they're willing to play more than the 81 games that had been mentioned, potentially over 100, but maintaining that they wanted prorated salaries. So if they pay play 50% of a season, they want 50% of what they had agreed to. And if it goes up, then they want even more. Some people think that the natural concession here would be that the players would get the 50% amount they had already agreed to with a willingness to add these free, quote unquote, free games onto the season. The league is skeptical of wanting a longer season for fear it increases the odds of a second shutdown, which would wipe out the postseason, which is the most lucrative thing they own. So there's a ton of information there. So let me summarize this into what I think are probably the three main points. And then I promise you I'm going to let my friend Matt weigh in on this. The first thing we need to understand is the initial agreement. The second thing is this idea of owners opening up their books. And third, let's talk about what does this all mean for baseball in 2020. So first, the initial agreement. On March 26th, MLB and the Players Association agreed to a deal that covered not only prorated salaries for the upcoming season, as well as what would happen with service time, as well as what would happen with the Major League Baseball, Major League Draft, and much other. The owners are saying that had in it language that indicated if anything dramatic changed, i.e., we can't have fans in the stadium, that we need to renegotiate, that the Players Association owes it to the major leagues and Major League Baseball to, in good faith, come back to the negotiating table. The players would say, on March 26th, we all saw this coming. On March 26th, tons of stuff had been shut down. It was abundantly clear that there would be no fans in the stadium. We're dealing with billionaires who are presumably intelligent people that would have been able to see the writing on the wall. And so even if it's not overtly letter by letter written into the contract, nothing has changed. So I think we need to start there, Matt, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts. This initial agreement, March 26th, prorated salaries. What's your take? Do you side with the players? Do you side with the owners? What do you think?
Well, bear with me as I'll try to kind of toe the line without overtly picking a side. And one reason for that is I think that March agreement that obviously now is kind of the source of frustration and disagreement between the two parties. Frankly, I was surprised that an agreement came to fruition that quickly. I know that there was a bit of a ticking clock because opening day, the season was going to start, and so service time had to be addressed. So I was surprised that came together. Still surprised nonetheless that came together so quickly. Also, I thought that agreement honestly was fair. It made sense. The players, I didn't necessarily think they would concede salaries as willingly as they did. I think the trade-off was the service time factor that, I know there are a lot of details to that, but basically you could get credit for service time from last year, which is a full year if you played a full year, regardless of whether MLB was looking at 50 games, 60 games, 100 games, because in March, nobody really knew, right? We were all hoping, maybe still play a full season somehow, maybe still play 100 games, but nobody knew. I think, and like you touched on earlier, what we did sort of know or could foresee was that there weren't going to be fans at these games. So I would, quote unquote, side with the players on that regard. That being said, I know Joel Sherman had a report a couple days ago, maybe about a week ago by now, that there was language in an email sent to the Players Association as well. So not only was it worded potentially in the contract, obviously we haven't seen the contract ourselves, but maybe there was language in there that said, hey, we'd have to have a second round of negotiations plus an email. From that perspective, the owners did, sort of cover their side of things. Regardless, I think it's unfortunate that this is playing out the way that it is. Everything is relative for owners, for players, for the rest of society. We all want baseball back.
Yeah.
And it's obviously easier for us to kind of sit here and say, well, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? That being said, I think any system with, the prorated salaries is fair, whether it's with fans or no fans. And I understand maybe, some of the owners' concerns. I think they would just have to basically sort of bank on the postseason and making a lot of your money then, or who knows, maybe like we discussed on this show, maybe somehow by September or October, stadiums can be filled to 25% to 30%, and so the owners can make up some revenue that way. But yeah, it's tough, and frankly, the sliding scale, I thought, if the owners are going to insist on that, what I personally felt was if I'm the players, then okay, we'll do the sliding scale, but it's going to be based on our full salaries, not the prorated.
Yeah.
And that might be fair. I mean, and this is just me kind of thinking, off the top of my head type thing. Obviously, I haven't necessarily dug into, the true finances of, maybe it makes sense for this player and this player, but not the rest of the guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like you kind of hit it on the head. I don't know if when it comes to this March 26th agreement, I don't know if there's a right answer and a wrong answer. The owners can say it's not in the contract. And by all accounts, there's nothing in the contract that makes it clear that if, there's nothing in there that says even if fans don't play, this is a binding agreement. Even if fans can't come to the stadium. It basically says if something changes, the other side has to come to in good faith. Now, did something change? NBA stopped playing basketball on March 11th. This was signed 15 days after that. So you can imagine, I mean, it's hard for us to imagine what March 26th was like, but we're talking 2+ weeks after major sporting events had been canceled. So I think it was common knowledge that fans was unlikely at best. But again, so I understand the player side where they're like, everybody knew, and yet the owners are saying, well, it's not in the contract. And so I think it's a challenging one. I think it's a tricky one. And really, I don't know if there's an answer or a solution there. I think the biggest thing is the second piece that I mentioned, which is the books. And I think this is the key point, and I think it's the one that if I'm picking sides, I look at the players and I say, you guys are onto something and you're handling this the right way. Because essentially, this is the insanity of what the owners are asking. They've announced it will cost us 40% of the season, and they're expecting the players to accept an agreement by just taking their word for it. Like, there's been no proof that this 40%, I mean, there's been studies and whatnot, but it's like 40% of what? Owners are super shady about how they move money around and what they count as team revenue and what's non-team revenue, etc. And so the players are expected to renegotiate a deal based on the owner's word. Like, it's absolutely insane. And so there's no other way around it. So that's why I love what Scherzer said. Show us the books or we don't budge. Because I think it puts the ball in the owner's court and says, what are you going to do? If you do open the books, well, guess what? Why do you think they don't want to open the books? It's because there's probably numbers in there that as soon as the players see, the next negotiation are going to go sideways. Because there's going to be money that they're making or have made, because they're going to have to go back in the past and say, here's our revenues for the last 5 years or 10 years. Otherwise, they'd be open, right? If this were in any way beneficial for the owners, they'd be opened already. So I think that is kind of gets at the root of what I believe to be the issue. The owners look really, really shady to me in this whole process. And here's what I mean. They won't be honest about their money, right? They say this is what the truth is, but they won't prove it. They're the ones negotiating in public. The only reason we know any of this stuff, all of these proposals and ideas and suggestions, is because the owners are leaking stuff. The owners are leaking stuff left and right. And on top of that, they're trying to pit players against each other. They're saying, let's pander to the low-paid players and try and save ourselves some money on the Mike Trouts of the world. And thankfully, the players didn't bite. So I think that's the second piece and kind of what gets down to the root of the issue here. And it leads into the third question, which is what I want to come back to you with. How confident are we that baseball is happening? How confident are you, Matt? Are you significantly less confident today than you were a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? Where are you at?
No, so my confidence level dropped significantly, and we touched on it on last week's show. That's up until then, I was pretty certain that we would have a season, they'd get it all figured out. But then that proposal was made, and it was just like, man, what is this type thing? And so now, like from then to now, it's at about the same level. Which I mean, I don't know what percentage. Maybe I'm 20% less confident than I was beforehand.
Yeah.
That being said, I do still think we have a season. My only concern now would be what is it going to look like? Because up until these recent negotiations, 82 games, NL West playing the NL West and the AL West, they had that all sort of figured out. Like, okay, it was going to give us somewhat of a full season, or at least it would feel like it. I know only half, but it was substantial.
Yeah.
Now, if negotiations carry any longer, are we looking at then 60 games? Which at that point, it's better than nothing, but it's going to feel weird.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there's something interesting. I mean, one thing I didn't even mention is that basically the Players Association also said, hey, by the way, as far as health and safety and stuff, we're not even close there either. So it's almost like there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle and we haven't even come close. The one thing I would say is, surprisingly, as I was thinking about this question, I actually don't know if anything has changed as far as I'm concerned when it comes to optimism about baseball. And maybe that's because I'm a pessimistic person and I just assumed there was no way we were going to come to a quick agreement. I think that March 26th agreement, was a mirage in the sense that now we're probably seeing why. Like the owners were like, I can't believe they're going to accept this deal without any language about fans. And the players were probably like, I can't believe they're going to accept this deal, even though there's no, it's like, well, it's clear that maybe they were negotiating from different information. And so admittedly, this has gotten ugly over the last couple of weeks, but I think it's a negotiation. I think this is, you've got greedy people, you've got lots of money at stake. And so my sense is that as of today, nothing has changed. Now, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, I think we're going to know more because we're officially in the season where we're cutting into time when baseball could be being played. Like what I mean by that is 3 weeks ago, if they didn't have an agreement, it wasn't costing anything because, on May 31st, we weren't going to be playing baseball. Like health code wise, it just wasn't going to happen. But now as we get closer and closer to giving a couple weeks notice on a training camp and a 3-week training camp and then baseball, that July 4th date that they've mentioned seems a little more tenuous, I think. Now, again, I don't think anything's changed today, but I really believe that the next 5 to 7 days are critical. If we don't start to see some progress where it's like, hey, we're on the same page from a safety perspective, or we're on the same page from a health perspective, I think money's going to be the last thing we agree on. I think both sides are digging in their heels, and it's a matter of, is somebody going to humble themselves and be willing to meet in the middle? The owners, I'm skeptical. The players, I think they tend to have to cave more so than the owners, but the way they're playing it right now is really, really strong. So I'll be curious to see. So we'll see. We'll see over the next 5 days, 6 days. So that leads to this other big piece of news that is somewhat connected to this, somewhat unrelated, which is minor league baseball. Now, on Wednesday afternoon, a new wave of reports came out about how teams were going to treat their minor leaguers. And it was actually announced that hundreds of minor leaguers were about to get released, approximately 30 to 50 per team. So we're talking upwards of 1,000 minor leaguers that could be released. Now, the immediate reaction is why? Why are these people being cut? In part, there's a natural, easy answer, which is there's guys that sign spring training contracts, spring training ends, and they get cut. So there's a possibility that a lot of these guys were going to be out of work no matter what. But add on to that the fact that we've talked about, is minor league baseball going to get contracted? Or a number of these teams actually just going to cease to exist? And then add on to that another level, which is minor league baseball isn't happening this season. And so you add in all of these factors, and teams are looking at 30 to 50 extra guys on their roster and saying, let's get rid of them. Now, remember, we're talking about guys who make $400 a week, and that's seasonally. They don't even owe these guys 52 weeks a year. They owe them a few months a year at $400 a week, which is a reminder of the story that broke earlier in the week about the good old Oakland A's, who said, we're actually not going to pay any of our minor leaguers, but oh, by the way, you're just going to become unpaid employees. So you're still employees, you're still under contract, you're not free agents, but you're not going to get paid. Now, how in the world that is legal is beyond me. Hey, minor leaguer, honor the contract you signed. Now, we're not going to honor the part about us paying you, but by the way, you can't go anywhere. So it's insane. It makes no sense. It's sad. I mean, as I think about the minor league deal, I almost run out of adjectives, Matt. Like, how do you process this? What's your initial reaction when you hear 1,000 minor leaguers losing job, contraction, no minor leagues, $400 a week, etc.?
It's just another reminder of kind of the sobering reality that the sport is facing, or at least the owners find themselves in this position and make these kind of decisions. It is a business, and as much as we sit here and have discussed ad nauseum what's going to happen with the Major League Baseball season, there are literally thousands of players in the minor leagues who have no, I don't want to say no future, but basically are gonna go a year without playing baseball.
Yeah.
I know no official announcement has been made about the minor league season, but you've kind of sensed it, and multiple reporters have come out and said it's pretty much inevitable. It's just a matter of time until they announce that the 2020 minor league season is canceled. The Dodgers, are among the teams that have pledged to continue paying their minor league players through June at minimum. So once June comes, that maybe that could be extended. But honestly, I would imagine that by the end of June, the minor league season would have been canceled. And my guess, unfortunately, is that most teams will just say, okay, we're not going to keep paying these guys because there's nothing to pay them for. It's not the mindset that I would hope that teams have, but it's just I think it's just acknowledging what the reality will probably be.
Yeah.
And for a team like the Dodgers, it's going to be really interesting because they've built under Andrew Friedman a very deep farm system to both support their major league roster when players get injured and to pull off all these blockbuster trades.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was kind of, the natural place that my mind wanders when I listen to all of these things, starting with the agreement and the proposals and the minor leagues thing is, how does this impact the Dodgers? And I think there's a couple big things that jump out to me as we think about this from the Dodger perspective. First of all, if the Players Association is going to counter with the suggestion for a season of over 100 games, that is great news for the Dodgers. The more regular season games that are played, the more likely the Dodgers are to separate themselves from the field, the more likely they are to be playing postseason. Now, if you want to play devil's advocate, why would that be bad for the Dodgers? I think the answer would be this. The longer a season you're banking on, the more you're hoping that there's no second wave of this virus. Because an 80-game season with the postseason is going to end about a month before a 100-game season with postseason, unless we're doing tons of doubleheaders, which is possible. But the longer the season drags on, the more at risk you are for losing the postseason. So if you're the Dodgers and you say, hey, we want 100 regular season games, but if it doesn't end up resulting in a World Series even being played, that's a problem. So that's one piece for me. And the second you just touched on is the minor league system. If you want to be negative, you say, hey, the Dodgers, those 30 to 50 guys that might be getting cut are probably a lot better from the Dodgers' perspective than they are from, say, the Giants' perspective or some of these other teams. The flip side is the Dodgers are elite when it comes to identifying talent and developing talent, which means Andrew Friedman, you've got to assume, is looking around at some of those 30 to 50,000 names that are going to be put on the free agent wire and say, hey, there's 15 guys in that list that we actually think are, the next Chris Taylor or the next Justin Turner or fill in the blank. And so I waffle between those. Do any of those resonate with you more than others?
No, Frank, honestly, I hadn't necessarily looked at it from the standpoint that you just pointed out of the Dodgers could be a team that maybe capitalizes on, these other organizations having to make the minor league cuts. That's true. And I was also thinking maybe because the Dodgers do value their farm system so much that maybe they would be willing to go a step further or two steps further than some of these other teams have to still keep the players in their organization. Because, maybe these guys are getting cut from high A or low A, but who knows? Corey Seager played for the Rancho Cucamonga Quakes at some point. Cody Bellinger was on the Quakes. Josiah Gray was on. You have these prospects who have played there, so that'll come down to talent evaluation, I think, and it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. And what's interesting is I think we won't have an answer anytime soon. This will be 2 years at best, probably 3, 4, 5 years down the line. You'll see the ramifications of decisions that were made now.
Yeah. Yeah. And while we don't know, admittedly, a ton about the Dodgers ownership as it stands, as far as how are they going to handle this? They don't have a history to go off of, negative or positive, as far as are they going to be super cheap in this season or not? The one thing you can say is a team like the Dodgers isn't going anywhere. Things might financially look bleak now, but even the most pessimistic person says 5 years from now, the Dodgers are going to be fine. Once fans start showing back up into stadiums, the Dodgers are brand. It's some of these smaller market teams that are sort of barely floating by year to year, supposedly, right? Floating by year to year, that are more in trouble. So it'll be fascinating to watch. Again, it's really unfortunate as it pertains to minor leaguers and stuff like that. But as you said, I think you're right. I think a lot of this stuff is we're going to find out 3, 4, 5 years from now, what does it mean? And how does it play out? But those stories are coming of, oh, this guy was one of the guys that was released when the coronavirus, and here he is in the major leagues,
Yeah, I will also just add, touching on the Dodgers organization, they did announce this week that they're going to be implementing tiered salary cuts for their full-time employees. And similar to kind of the sliding scale that the league proposed to the Players Association, the senior executives and everybody at the top are taking a higher percentage salary cut as opposed to some of the lower level employees, which on the surface, obviously you prefer that nobody has to take pay cuts.
Yeah.
But on the surface, I think that is an approach that I can sort of get behind where, if you have an Andrew Friedman who is a little bit more established in his career, he's a little bit more fortunate than maybe a full-time regular other employee the Dodgers might have, taking more of a cut so that the team can avoid furloughs and layoffs.
Yeah.
So if we got that from the front office, like I said, maybe it does or doesn't kind of feed into the notion that they might try to protect their minor league players as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is one thing. I mean, you just wait for the news to come out. Am I going to be proud to be a Dodger fan or disappointed as a Dodger fan when they announce this, and this. So far, it's been all good news. They've handled things really well, and we can all be grateful that we're not Oakland A's fans. So, well, let's end with something a little more upbeat and a little more fun, which is one of the big themes on Twitter of late as it pertains to The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary, is the question of what do you want to see next? Who would be the other sports stories, athletes, etc., that you would love to see a massive documentary on? And so I pitched to you, I said, let's think about the Dodgers. Let's talk the last 30 years. So we're kind of working from the 88 championship on. Both you and I mentioned either A, 88 has been covered ad nauseum. There's content out there, so we don't need another one. But B, let's just look at some other stories. So in the last 30 years, is there a Dodgers player? Is there a Dodgers moment? Is there a Dodgers year? Is there a Dodgers anything that you would love to see some sort of extended documentary on? So I asked you to pick 3. I've got a few of my own. Why don't we alternate? I'll let you go first. If there was one, what's your number one seed? What's your number one choice?
Ooh. I haven't necessarily ranked them, but I will go with Matt Kemp.
Okay.
And I think the reason is obviously he was drafted by the Dodgers.
You just want some Rihanna action in your life. Be honest, Matt.
No, I'm keeping this to baseball. He was, drafted by the Dodgers. He had his 2011 season that ended up being this huge controversy because, a lot of people felt that he should have won MVP outright anyway. And then the whole Ryan Braun scenario emerged. Then you have Kemp getting traded to the Padres. He had some parting comments about the Dodgers organization after that. Then he gets sent to Atlanta eventually, and then again has some comments and alludes to, he's happy to be in a real baseball town for once. So there's all that. And then he finds his way back to the organization, but it was only supposed to be basically a salary dump, and they were expected to either trade him or cut him. He ends up making the team. He becomes a valuable player in left field for them. We've ranked his hits off Archie Bradley late in that 2018 season as the Dodgers were kind of climbing back up the NL West standings. So I think looking at kind of his obviously entire career and then just sort of the back and forth would be interesting.
Yeah, and the Rihanna cameo doesn't hurt at all as far as we go. But yeah, I mean, I see that. There's a Hollywood aspect to that of, if that movie existed, you'd be like, there's no way this guy ends up back in the Dodgers. It's like like a fairy tale. But that's a great choice. Well, my first choice, I felt like was an obvious one. I think you said this one didn't even make your list, maybe because you just assumed that it was going to be on mine. But I got to go with Puig. I mean, he's the most interesting player the Dodgers have had in 30 years. I think that's safe to say. I think you could argue he might be the most interesting player that baseball has had in a really, really long time. And I say that for a number of reasons. Obviously, it starts with the story of how he got here, coming from Cuba. You have some of that reporting of him on a boat multiple times, getting caught, essentially, and then he may or may not have been imprisoned by drug lords in Mexico, and then he may or may not be a portion of every dollar he ever earns to some drug lord somewhere. It's that whole thing. On top of just, from a physical perspective, one of the most impressive guys we've ever seen in a Dodger uniform. An attitude perspective as just a guy who didn't fit, a guy who was immature, a guy who culturally didn't fit in and was in a new place. And then just the moments, the home runs, the tongue wagging, the bat flips. I mean, just... we're talking about a guy that checked for me every box of unbelievable story, unbelievable talent, polarizing personality, cultural differences, the whole thing. To me, it's like I would watch 10 hours of Yasiel Puig documentary straight. I would binge the whole thing. I wouldn't even flinch.
So how many of those 10 hours would be dedicated to his friendship with Bumgarner?
Yeah, I mean, the more the better. The more the better. My favorite picture, I wish I don't have it now, but my favorite picture of all time is when Puig and Bumgarner look like they're about to fight. And there's a picture where Puig is getting held back by Brandon Belt and one other guy. And Puig, it looks like he's leaning forward. And Bumgarner looks like he's like wilting backwards. It's just my favorite. So that would probably be my the movie poster is probably that picture, and the trailer is just bat flips for a minute and a half. So that's what I've got. That's my top choice. What do you got for number 2?
All right, so my second one is going to be looking at the Frank McCourt era. Just because I think the story of kind of how he became to be owner of the Dodgers, basically without putting a cent of his money into the team, that was a little shaky. And suspect to begin with, but then he gets them back into the postseason, and kind of I picked this period because within that, then you have the Manny Ramirez trade and those seasons,
Yeah.
and then you have Frank McCourt's battle with Bud Selig while he was commissioner over who's running the team, how the sale of the team is going to go. Like there's a little bit of everything in that.
Yeah.
It was obviously a bit of a dark time for the franchise, but I'd be intrigued to kind of learn kind of the untold details, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an element of that would probably be depressing. And yet it's when you look at a guy like Frank McCourt, everyone looks at him like he's an idiot and he's slimy. And it's on the flip side, it's like, is he an idiot or is he a genius? Because he basically made $1 billion. He owns half of the Dodger Stadium parking lots, and he did it all with no money in his bank account. So I know that the book Molly Knight wrote, I believe The Best Team Money Can Buy, is a great one. And so if you've got stories out there that exist, it would be a great one. Okay, my second choice, again, if you've been watching this show, if you've been listening, this one's probably obvious as well, but I got to go with my guy Gagne. I feel like I get to mention him on every episode, but Eric Gagne, he's Canadian. He's a hockey player growing up. I was doing a little digging on my boy. This is a quote. This is a paragraph straight off of his Wikipedia. Are you ready for this? Gagne, who spoke only French, went to Seminole Junior College in Seminole, Oklahoma. Now just pause for a second. We have a Canadian hockey player who speaks no English attending junior college in Oklahoma, okay? He taught himself English by watching the sitcom Kenan and Kel. I mean, I don't know. I don't even care if this is true. He eventually became the star pitcher. He was a 30th round draft pick of the White Sox in 1994. Didn't sign and became an amateur free agent signed by the Dodgers in 1995. Okay, so that's how his career starts. 1997, he has Tommy John. Up until 2002, he's a starter. Well, then he converts to a relief pitcher. 2003, we all know the story. 67 games, 55 saves, not a single one blown, a 1.20 ERA, a 0.86 FIP, which is basically a predictor of ERA. So they're saying his 1.20 ERA was actually unlucky. He had 137 strikeouts. It was part of a 3-season stretch where he had 152 saves with only 6 blown. Of course, he saved 84 in a row. He was the Cy Young. We've got all of that. Add in the steroids, little steroids sprinkled on top. And again, sign me up for as much Eric Gagne's background and details and videos of him coming out to his entrance song and the shirts with the beard on it. I'm in. I'm in for all the Gagne. Tell me you wouldn't watch it, Matt. Tell me.
No, I absolutely would. I mean, how it would need to obviously incorporate his time in Oklahoma, because if talk about a fish out of water.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine a Canadian French-speaking hockey player in a place called Seminole, Oklahoma? Oh. Okay, number 3 for you.
All right. So the third one, it's probably a little bit obvious, but I think it would warrant looking back on it, and I'll preface it that this would need to be done similar to the Jordan one, where it's, you're decades, several years removed from the actual event. And it would be the 2017 season. I'm not sure if we've had the debate on this show yet. I would argue, probably until I'm blue in the face, that the 2017 team was more talented than the 2018 team.
Mm-hmm.
I know 2018 had Walker Buehler, but I still take the 17 roster. That was a great season for the team. Obviously, they advanced to the World Series for the first time since '88, so I think that in itself is noteworthy. Not only that, but they also did it in dominant fashion. They got into that NLCS and they just completely waxed the Cubs. So that would be, I think, interesting to look at. And then, of course, you have what was an entertaining World Series as it was happening, heartbreaking how it ended. And now you have the added layer of the Houston Astros scandal.
Yeah.
And so I think, not that players weren't candid already, because I think they were. And we've discussed this. It was refreshing to kind of hear them openly speak and voice their frustrations. But I think they would be even more so open to speaking further when being further removed from the situation. And that would be all the more interesting, I think.
I think we'd need a box of tissues to watch your documentary. We'd be crying when Kemp gets traded and when he starts talking bad about the Dodgers. Then we'd cry for joy when the miraculous comes. Then we have to cry again because we have to remember Frank McCourt and the 2017 World Series. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. A 2017 Dodgers, which we're biased, but maybe one of the better teams to not win a World Series. Obviously, you've got the why behind it. The drought since 1988, etc. I could see it. So, okay, you've got your three. Now, my last one, I'll admit, I had a few different options. One that popped to mind was a Kenley Jansen one, which might sound fairly boring on the surface, but remember, this is a guy who in 2009 was a starting catcher for the Netherlands in the World Baseball Classic as they beat the Dominican Republic. He made it as high as AAA as a catcher. Just think about that. The guy's like 6'6", 6'7", something like that. He was playing catcher in 2009 in AAA. He couldn't hit a lick. So they were like, you need to try something else. He gets called up to the Dodgers as a relief pitcher in 2010. The rest is history. That's a fascinating one. Another option was the Adrian Gonzalez trade, also known as the Nick Punto trade. I just think that's a moment that really, it's one of the most memorable moments in my life as a Dodger fan. Just felt like a shift in the organization. But here's what I'm going to go with. And this one might come a little bit out of left field. It's not about a player. It's not about a moment. It's not about any of that. I want to know more about Andrew Friedman. Okay, I want to know more about Andrew Friedman. Not only is this a guy who did what he did in Tampa Bay, he comes here, he's done everything he set out to do. And we know nothing about this guy, it feels like. Now, part of the reason I'm so intrigued, because if you watch the Dodgers Zoom party from last week, the guy's just chilling in a backwards hat. Like, I'm on here sometimes on our show, and I've got a backwards hat. I got my dad texting me telling I look like a schmuck, and that I look unprofessional. And I'm like, you know what, Pops? Look at my guy, Andrew Friedman. Backwards hat, T-shirt, Dodger T-shirt. Like, he seems so freaking chill. And yet, he's a genius. He's fantastic at his job. And I just want to know more. I don't know if I'm missing something. I feel like I don't know anything about the guy.
No, yeah, that's fair to say. And what I will add is seeing him obviously on the Zoom calls and how he interacts with the players there, but also when we've covered games and sometimes Andrew will pass through the clubhouse. He's very much, there's no denying he comes from, sort of the analytical background, mm-hmm. right? I mean, that's kind of who he is. I think he has scaled back on that since he's come to LA and adjusted his philosophy a little bit. But what you can really see, he does kind of care about the players and he does have a good relationship with them.
Got it.
I mean, you saw, on that Zoom call you referenced, Andrew sitting there and there's a Tampa Bay Rays jersey hanging over his left shoulder. And he's talking about different memorabilia he has in there. And Walker Buehler says, we don't see any of the Dodger stuff. And he just took it in stride. He said, I'll have to invite you over one time. He didn't take it personally at all. And that's how he's been. And look, I'll see him pass through the clubhouse, stop and talk to a player. They both kind of laugh and joke around, and then he keeps going.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, he just seems like such a fascinating guy. Obviously great at his job. Obviously, we hope that his story is far from being finished writing, because we hope there's a championship in LA at some point. But so there you go. There's our 6 choices. I threw in a couple extras because I'm really bad at narrowing lists down, but there you go. Well, that's just about all that we've got. There's lots in there to read up on and pay attention. As always, check out DodgerBlue.com. There's one story up there right now, which is really fascinating. Dodger Stadium is open right now and actually being used as a coronavirus testing site. The Mayor Garcetti said it's the largest in the state. It's possible he said it's the largest in the nation, which with up to 6,000 tests a day that they can do, all free of charge. So again, more details on Dodger Blue. Matt, you had some more info on stuff going on at Dodger Stadium. What do you know?
Yeah, so on that coronavirus testing site opened Tuesday, and then on Thursday, the Los Angeles Dodgers Foundation and Salvation Army distributed food boxes with the equivalent of 40,000 meals to 2,000 local families. And this is all part of the Dodgers and Los Angeles Dodgers Foundation, their initiative to kind of provide coronavirus relief efforts that they announced back in April. As you may remember, one of those initiatives was to distribute Dodger dogs at the Dream Center. So they're hard at work, kind of giving back to the community as much as they can.
Love it. Love it. Well, and as always, check out DodgerBlue.com for the latest updates throughout the week. You can follow us at social media, DodgerBlue1958 on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, etc. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate tuning in. Hopefully next time we see you, we'll have some good news about baseball in 2020. Have a good night.